welcome. Thank you for joining us for this Meritorious Fireside Chat with Barry Bridger, a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel and 6-year survivor of the Hoa Loa Prison, also known as Hanoi Hilton. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Jim Petersen, CEO and founding principal of Diversified Professional Coaching. Jim Petersen is a leadership coach, retired military officer, professor, author, and financial services industry executive who has over 3 decades of experience. Today, he is the Roger Hull James S. Bingay Chair of Leadership at the American College of Financial Services and teaches leaders a variety of subjects. After graduating from the United States Naval Academy, Jim was a commissioned officer in the United States Navy, where he served almost 22 years on active duty and in the reserves as a nuclear submariner, retiring as a captain. Jim is a member of the Financial Planning Association, Financial Services Institute, FinSECA, and the Fort Worth Estate Planning Council. He is also a past president and emeritus of the Alumni Board of the American College, chairman of the American College Penn Mutual Center for Veterans Affairs, and previously a trustee and ambassador for the FinSECA Foundation. He served on boards for Texas Christian University and the University of Tampa. Jim has widespread training, experience, and teaches leadership for FinSECA and is certified by the CFP board to teach the CFP curriculum as well as ethics. As an author, Jim's first 2 books, From Combat to Client Service and From Combat to Corporate Life, deal with hiring veterans in business. His 3rd book, A Spirit to Soar, is due out this year. Please join me in welcoming our moderator, Jim Petersen. Thank you, Jim, for joining us today.
Thank you, Catherine. It's certainly a pleasure to be here this evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is going to be a real treat for you because the individual that I'm about to introduce is someone who has had a great effect on my life. I've known Barry Bridger for 35 years. We first met in the financial services industry. And 15 years ago, I said to Barry, tell me your story. And of course, Barry had been professionally speaking about his time in Vietnam. And so he started on that. And I said, no, I want to hear your story from when you began, right from the beginning. And for the next 2.5 hours, I was captivated by Barry, and his wife, Sheila, was there too. And I said, Barry, if it's okay with you, someday I'm going to write your biography. And the book that Catherine just mentioned, The Spirit to Soar, we hope will be out in the next 3 to 4 months, that will talk about life lessons from Barry Bridger's life. You know, in life, it happens from time to time that you get to find meaning in another person's life. And Barry has enriched mine. His family and my family have been close for a very long time. So I've asked Barry to be in a fireside chat today. And so I'm going to be asking him questions about his life and about his experiences. And you will be as amazed as I am with this American hero, Lieutenant Colonel Barry Bridger. Welcome, Barry, and Sheila is there too. We're glad to have you here this evening. And Barry, let's start out by you starting out in life. What was it like when you got started?
Well, the first memory I have about being on this earth was benches, long benches with brown and black paint in a big room with a bunch of kids screaming and carrying on, eating green pea soup, and run into the bathroom, which wasn't far away, and throwing up, because that's how good the food was. And I had no idea where I was, what was going on, until eventually, as time passed, I realized I was in an orphanage. Took a while, but that's the first memory I have. And in an orphanage back in those days, in the 40s, if you weren't adopted by the time when you were a baby, you weren't going to get adopted. And I was 5 years old. So my chances of adoption were very, very small. And the other thing about the orphanage that I remember, it was a constant war between the kids my age and the older kids. We had very little to play with, and we fought like tigers for anything we could get hold of, a bat, a ball, or whatever. So it was a constant contest between the young and the old, and pretty much of a bland environment. I met a little boy named Billy, who was about my age, and my only friend in the orphanage. We had to fight together to secure anything that would be helpful to us, and we did. And we spent our day on an old chinaberry tree watching the cars pull up to the orphanage, because invariably when a car pulled up, a door would open, people would get out. Oftentimes a small child would get out as well. And we were absolutely amazed at what the heck was going on. We weren't sure what was going on until one day, the headmaster walked outside after a car had pulled up and asked me to come inside. And so I walked in, and there was a family sitting there with a little boy and mom and dad. And the headmaster said, "Would you like to go to dinner and spend the evening with this family?" Oh, I immediately said yes, because that meant I'd get to ride in the car, which I'd never done. And I was very familiar with this thing called a car. And I wanted very much to do so, plus I'd get away from the orphanage. Well, they took me home with them. And I remember that night we had cottontail rabbit for the meal. Very good, by the way, tastes very much like chicken. And the next morning I was up about just before daybreak and standing out in their front yard where they had a goldfish pond, looking at goldfish, which I'd never seen, and I'd never seen a goldfish pond. I hadn't seen anything. I'd never seen a bridge over water. I was just absolutely mesmerized as I looked around. I couldn't get enough of it. And their little boy, Ellis, who was kind of a big kid for his age, about my age, but big, he comes out, walks over to the goldfish pond, reaches down and grabs a goldfish and starts squeezing it. I went into a rage and immediately jumped on Ellis and shoved his head under the water in the goldfish pond. Here comes his daddy, screaming bloody murder. They packed me up and take me back to the orphanage, and that was that.
Well, and so
they made a good impression, I guess.
Yeah, so you can see that Barry has a certain personality, and it will come out. And he started with nothing. But Barry, tell us about the trip that you made. It turned out with that family, and you ended up at a little girl's birthday party. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was very interesting. The same family, bless their hearts, came back about a month or two later and asked if they could take me on a trip, which was about 100 miles to the south of Durham, North Carolina, down in the area of Fort Bragg. And so they packed me in the front seat, and Mama did the driving, and Daddy was in the back seat with his boy Ellis, dead asleep. And it was in the middle of the night, and we were driving down these country roads down into the Carolinas. And I was just wide awake. Everything was incredible. And it was raining. And these windshield wipers were going, wah, 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 wah. And I'd never seen that. And I thought, wow. And all these lights on the panel. And I finally couldn't help but contain myself. I took my finger and I pushed this one very pretty button. When I did, all the lights went off on the car. And panic just went everywhere. Poor Miss Ellis started slamming on the brakes and screeching the tires, and everybody woke up in the back seat, and I was then banished to the back seat. And we finished the trip down into the Carolinas. And when we got there, we visited with a family. And during the course of the evening, the family, the Hilbert family, said there's a little girl having a birthday party, Barry's age, on Main Street. We only had two streets in my hometown, Main Street and Back Street. So on Main Street, this little girl was having a birthday party, and they figured this orphan might have fun by going to the birthday party, which I'd never been to. So they took me over to her home the next day, about midday. And there was a table out there with ice cream and cake and all these kids and whatnot. And the kids were irritating. They were blowing those funny little things that hit you in the face when you blow them. I forgot what they called it and things. And I kept swiping my hand at them, trying to knock them down. But finally, Miss Fussell came over and said, Barry, would you like some ice cream and cake? Well, I knew what that was. And I said, yes, ma'am. So they took me over to a table, gave me some ice cream and cake. And then like a dog with a bone, I looked around to see who was watching me because I wasn't going to let anybody get that cake or that ice cream. My orphanage attitude was starting to rear its ugly head. And I looked over across the lawn and saw a mimosa tree. And mimosa blooms were in full, and that fragrance was unbelievable for those of you who don't know mimosa trees. And so I walked over to the mimosa tree, put my back to the tree, and sat down and started very quietly and secretly and watchfully eating my ice cream and cake. And as I did so, I couldn't help but raise my head to a big magnolia tree across the road that was in full bloom. And behind that magnolia tree was a home with 6 columns and a slate walkway up to the home. And the yard was adorned with azaleas and camellias all in full bloom. I was just fascinated with all that I saw. And I quit eating my ice cream and cake, and my jaw was hanging as I looked at this incredible picture. About that time, Miss Fussell comes up. She says, Barry, would you like to go over and see that home? Because she had been watching me and knew that I was intently watching that house. So I said, yes, ma'am. So they took me around to the side door, and we were met there by a lady, Miss Bridger. And we went inside, and the lady of the house said to me, Barry, go look at anything you want to. We'll be in here if you want to talk to us. We have no requirements. Go away. And that was perfect. I was free to do what I wanted to. And I started going through this very beautiful, very large home with things. Everything was a new experience in terms of what I saw. And I heard a radio, and I knew what a radio was. And I went up these stairs to the 2nd floor into a room, and I abruptly walked into the room, and there was a gentleman lying in the bed with a paper in front of him, reading the paper, and the radio was the New York Yankees and the Detroit Tigers, and it was the 9th inning, 6-5 in favor of the Yankees. And this gentleman said, if you want to hear the rest of that, sit over there on that other bed. And he never even pulled his paper down. And so that disarmed me. I felt comfortable. So the Yanks won that game 6-5. I said, I don't like Tigers, and I'm glad those Yanks won. And I walked out of there. And now I'm downstairs on the 1st floor walking along, and I walked into this kitchen. Had no idea I was about to, and went smack dab right into a Black American lady named Maggie, who lived on the property and was cooking. And I had never been close to a Black American at that time. And I was totally surprised. And she looked like Aunt Jemima with that bandana around her head. And I turned around to run because I didn't know what was going on because I hadn't seen anyone like that. And she immediately says, you come back here, I have something for you. And I went back, she disarmed me, and she looked at me and she says, do you like peach cobbler? And I said, what's that? And she says, hold on. So she dished me up some peach cobbler and some ice cream. I thought I died and gone to heaven. And then she said, would you like a second helping? And I said, yes, ma'am. She said, don't you tell anybody I gave you this. And I said, oh, you're going to tell everybody. She gives me a second helping. And here comes Mr. Henry, the man of the house, and Miss Myrtle. And they asked me to have supper with them. So I got peach cobbler again. It was getting really good. The next day, I was sitting at the table with Miss Myrtle, and we were eating breakfast. Mr. Henry, the man of the house, had gone off to work. Well, all of a sudden, I heard the door open on the back porch. And Miss Myrtle got up and walked back out on the back porch. And it was Mr. Henry. I was still at the kitchen table. And she said, Barry, come out here. We want to talk to you. So I walked out of the kitchen into the back porch, and there was Mr. Henry, and in his hands was a puppy. And he got down on one knee, and she did too. And she said, Barry, would you be our little boy? And I never left that home. That's how I was adopted.
Barry, that's a fantastic story. But you had a little problem one night, I think, right? What happened then?
Well, you're actually talking about the first night I was there. In preparation for bedtime, they took me up to the second floor and opened a door I had not opened. And inside was a room with a private bath, a balcony, and all the paraphernalia you can imagine for fighter aircraft and cargo aircraft. And it was only then that I found out that their son was still in the war zone from the Second World War. And he was a ferry pilot, and he was just an incredible aviator. And that was the room they allowed me to sleep in. Well, I woke up about 4 o'clock in the morning, wide awake, put on my clothes, went downstairs, walked out the back door, and walked out to the main street, and started walking down the main street and completely disappeared. By daybreak, I was probably 5 to 6 miles away, walking along, looking at things I had never seen in my life, from fireflies to sounds that I'd never heard. And I was mesmerized. I could not get enough of it. Well, darkness fell. Meanwhile, the Bridger family had contacted the Highway Patrol, the Wildlife Department, and all of the local citizens, and they were looking for this orphan that nobody had a clue where he is. And they were concerned because the place was filled with swamps and whatnot, and they were desperate. They had turpentine torches hissing along the bays and the swamps, and they were screaming and talking and carrying on. And meanwhile, it's 8 o'clock at night, and I'm bebopping down a dang country road, which is nothing but gravel, having the time of my life, when all of a sudden I see car lights. So I slammed on brakes and looked down the road at the car, and it's coming my way. And I said, I'm gonna stand right here and watch that car. So it pulls up, it's got bubble guns on top and a big bear hat, smoky bear hat. This guy rolls this window down and looks at me and says, is your name Barry? And I went, how'd you know my name? The whole world was looking for this lost orphan. I had no idea. But I was
that's the part of Barry's life where he learned a lot. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But I want to fast forward through your adolescence and to that joining the Air Force and that fateful night mission. On your 100th mission, you get to go home from Vietnam. But Barry was on his 75th mission, and he's going to share with you what happened.
The senior ranking officer for the air base at Dubai in Thailand, that base housed a bunch of F-4 Phantoms, and I was an F-4 Phantom pilot. And our Robin Olds, who was the commander, had decided he would try to trick the North Vietnamese Air Force into sending up a bunch of their MiG-21 fighters, which was their top-rated fighter from the Soviets, and shoot a bunch of them down, but he had to trick them. So the way he did it is he talked to one of the air bases up there in Thailand at that time, which housed a bunch of F-105s. And the F-105s were bomb droppers. The F-4s were pretty much air-to-air combat fighters. And every day, the F-105s would fly into the Hanoi area and drop their weapons on bridges and petroleum plants and so forth. And they used the same route of entry into North Vietnam. So what he did is he asked the F-105s to stand down, and we would use their call signs and pretend we were F-105s when in fact we were loaded with missiles, air-to-air missiles, and we were F-4 Phantoms. So this worked like a charm. It could have worked a little better, except we had some bad weather that day. Anyway, we went up and came into the Hanoi area the same way the 105s always did. It was like a daily milk run with 105 call signs, and the North Vietnamese launched their MiG-21 fleet. When the melee was over, we had shot down 7 MiG-21s in that one mission. I was the number 4 aircraft in a flight of 4 Phantoms, and that day the aircraft were loaded with a jamming pod. That was the first time it would be used, and that jamming pod was designed to jam the missile from the SAM ground-based site to the missile itself and guide the missile into one of our aircraft. In this case, they were aiming at me. We were told that if our pod did not work, in other words, we couldn't use it to jam that radar signal from the SAM site to the missiles that they were firing, that we were to fly in a special formation and that the pods of the other aircraft would protect us. So all you had to do was stay where you were because you had 4 pods with a flight of 4 aircraft. My pod wasn't working. By the way, by the time I got home, they changed the rule. The rule is if your pod was not working, you turned around and went back because it was that dangerous. In any event, we were flying along at about, we were at about 20,000 feet, and we were running about 400 or 500 true airspeed. And I am looking down below me. I don't have a pod, and I spot this missile coming through the clouds. And I hit the mic button and said, "Shark flight break left, SAM's 10 o'clock below." Well, the other 3 aircraft began to bank. I got nervous because I just sensed something was not right. So I turned my aircraft upside down and split S into the earth. And just as I did, this missile went off and blew the right wing off, half the left wing off, the tail off. And I'm in this little chunk. And when I was hit, it was probably running close to 600, maybe more, miles per hour, true airspeed. And I shut my eyes real tight because I knew I'd have to eject. And I shut my eyes real tight because I knew it was also going to be damn breezy running that fast. And I pulled the handle. And when I opened my eyes from the ejection, I was blind. When I grabbed at my face to see what the heck had gone wrong, and I discovered to my great joy that the missile shrapnel had hit my helmet and loosened it up enough that the helmet spun around on my face, and I'm looking into the back of it. And so I turned it back around so I could see, and I remember celebrating, saying, "Yes, I can see," you know. Well, meanwhile, I'm sitting in this chunk of an aircraft that's now probably running 400 or 500 miles an hour through the air, and a lot of the parts missing, and I need to eject from that aircraft or die. So I ejected, and I shut my eyes real tight, and when I opened them, as I said, I realized I had the missile broke, the shrapnel of the missile loosened up the helmet, but I was okay. Now I'm sitting in the ejection seat itself that has a drogue chute on it that stabilizes the seat as it's going down towards the earth. That day, the weather was every 1,000 to 2,000 feet layered all the way up to about 20,000 feet, really bad weather. But as I'm descending, I'm hitting these cloud layers, and when you hit them, it's so dense you can't see anything, and then you pop out, and 1,000 feet below you be the nest deck. So I'm going boom, 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 boom towards the earth. And I look on the side of my seat, and I see the sensor which senses 10,000 feet barometric altitude, 10,000 feet above the ground, and it should automatically kick me out of the seat and deploy my parachute. And I'm looking at it very suspiciously because I'm already figuring I ought to be down below 10,000 feet by now. How come that thing hasn't pushed me out of the seat and deployed my chute? Well, finally, I got tired of waiting. I said, I'm alive now. I'm going to stay alive. So I reached down and grabbed this handle on the ejection seat and pulled it. When you do that, it disconnects you from the seat and it pushes you out. And now you got to manually deploy your parachute. So I'm falling through all of these clouds, bump, 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 and I'm trying to get hold of the handle to deploy my chute, and I can't find it. And that put me in a panic. I said, where the hell is that handle? And when I ejected, my parachute bag went up over my head about 9 feet on a strap. And I instinctively grabbed that strap with my right hand, pulled it down, but I couldn't find the handle on the parachute bag. But then I realized it really was attached to my harness. And so I reached down and grabbed the handle and pulled it, and it jerked the dickens out of me and did some damage, but it inflated and I landed right in the middle of downtown Hanoi.
And people were happy to see you there, but
Yeah.
you weren't happy to be there. Barry, you talked a little bit about thinking you were blind for a little time there. Did you use that to your advantage when you were in the Hanoi Hilton?
That's kind of funny. The shrapnel had hit my head, which took about 20 stitches to close up, which never got closed up for about a month after I ended up in Hanoi because they wouldn't do anything. It was just a big open sore. But in any event, when you have a head wound like that, you bleed profusely. And it was all over my face. I looked like I had been hit with a machete across the head. And so I had all this blood on my head, and it dawned on me, well, I will pretend that this wound that I sustained has caused me to lose my vision, so that the best I can do is stumble around, but I can't see to do things that are small or tactical. Well, that turned out to be a pretty good move. Here's why. When you were shot down in North Vietnam, you would typically be taken immediately into an interrogation. And if you didn't cooperate, you immediately went to the torture chambers. And depending on who you were and just what your capabilities were, you might be there for a day, an hour, or you might be there for a week going through torture sessions. And so after I'd spent my period of time, which was about a week, in the torture chamber, they took me and put me in a prison cell in an area we call New Guy for American POWs. New Guy Village is what we called it. And so they put me in this room, and I hadn't been there very long. This was after I'd been through all the torture for about a week. And my peephole opens to my cell, and this interrogator looks in and says, "You write biography?" And I said, "Yeah, I did. You didn't lose it, did you?" And he walks off, shuts the peephole, comes back about a week later. And he says, "You write biography?" I said, "Yeah, I write biographies." He leaves, he comes back a week later, opens the peephole and says, "You no write biography." And he says, "Tonight, we take you to hospital. If you lie, you will be severely punished." And I'm thinking to myself, this is going to be a fun evening. So they pulled up with a Jeep, put me in the Jeep and took me downtown Hanoi. Walked into a hospital to the second floor. In the room was a curtain that was about 8 feet high, coming off the ceiling. At the other end of the room was a desk and a chair. The interrogator sat down behind the desk. They made me sit down in the chair. And about that time, this technician comes from behind that big screen down at the other end of the room. And he opens the curtain, and it's an eye chart. I thought, oh boy. at the top of the eye chart is that big letter E. It was about the size of a wheelbarrow, pretty big E. In any event, the interrogator looks at me, and the technician has got what looks like a pool cue, and he's pointing to that big E at the top of the eye chart, not the 2020 block. In any event, he says to me, now you must tell the technician what you see. And I then got up out of my chair, and I started walking in a kind of a semicircle, looking around like I can't see anything. I don't know where I am. And I'm walking back and forth. I wish I could demonstrate what I did. And this interrogator said, you must answer the technician. And meanwhile, I'm just driving them crazy because I'm pretending I can't say squat. Well, they finally get tired, put me back in the Jeep, takes me back to my cell, stick me in the cell, and nothing happens for 2.5 years. And then 2.5 years later, they have moved 150 American POWs into a prison, which is split by a big concrete wall, and there's cells on both sides. We had about 100 on each side, POWs. And at that time, they had quit torturing everybody like they had been, and they were kind of leaving us alone. And so we had some freedoms that we had not had before. And one of them was we had some bigger rooms, and I had learned to juggle up till that moment. And everybody was outside in this little bit of sunshine they could find. And I was in this big room, and I'm practicing my juggling, and I'm up to 6 balls. I'm juggling 6 balls at one time. And I don't know it, but the same interrogator that took me to the hospital is standing in the doorway watching me juggle. And the first thing I realized when he showed up, he said, the first thing I hear is a scream from him that is, "You lie, you lie, you lie." And I turned around and realized who I was looking at. And so my brain went into overdrive, thinking, now how do I respond to this to make this work out all right? And so what I did is I immediately responded with a fairly loud, regretful tone in which I said, "No lie. Used to juggle 10, now only 5. The interrogator doesn't know what to say. He looks at me like, that's pretty bad.
So
you same damn eyes now sitting in front of me in that damn room, but I managed to get through it.
Well, and when the book comes out, there are many, many stories like this. I want to move forward, Barry, to when you came back and you were at Andrews Air Force Base and you got an invitation. Tell us about that and meeting those 2 famous people.
Well, we came home in March of '73, and Sammy Davis Jr., to his credit, went to Dick Nixon and said, you need to throw a party for the returning American Vietnam prisoners of war. So Dick Nixon accepted that, and invitations went out to all of the POWs, and they invited, in addition to us, a lot of celebrities and governmental folks and so forth. It was quite a shindig, quite a big event. And I sat with Jimmy Stewart when I ate. I was walking down the hallway with a date. At that time, I'm still single, and I'm entitled. So I'm walking down the hallway with my date, very pretty nurse from Andrews Air Force Base. And I looked down the hallway, and coming straight at us is Dick Nixon, the president, and John Wayne. And they're walking straight at me and my date. And I nudged my date and I said, look who's coming. And she looks up and says, is that John Wayne? I said, and the president? Damn, woman. Recognize Nixon. But anyway, as they walk up close to us about to pass, I said, watch this. And I stepped in front of Wayne and I said, Wayne, where the hell were you? He looks at me and he says, "Well, Pilgrim, you don't believe that stuff, do you?" So anyway, I got to meet quite a few celebrities that night along with my date, and she got to kiss the president and John Wayne. So there you go.
There you go. That was great. That didn't work out. So he married Sheila, who you've seen in the background. They've had a great relationship. And as I've said, there's so many great stories, so much about this individual. Barry's reinvented himself multiple times. And we might, if we have any time at the end, we'll come back to this. But Barry, I really, you've had a wonderful life. I've participated in a lot of it. I've seen what you've done. I've been inspired by you. I'd like you to share with this audience what you've learned about life, having gone through all the different experiences that you have, particularly the orphanage and the Hanoi Hilton. You know, you're an orphan essentially twice in your life. What'd you learn?
The great philosopher Aristotle, he says, any man can obtain virtue with a guide. When I arrived in my new home down in Bladensboro, North Carolina, to meet and to live with my adopted parents, I quickly realized that the Bridgers were a heck of a guide. And not only were they a heck of a guide, the entire community shared those values and hopes and dreams for their children. And they built a bright highway. You couldn't miss it. To walk down, to give those kids a chance to live a life that is filled with joy and faith and hope. In other words, everybody was on board, everybody worked together. I was amazed. I'd never seen these things. And in my case, they had a special problem because I came out of that me first orphanage experience where all I wanted to do was be first, because that's all we did was fight to be first. And I had to change my attitude. And it became very clear very quickly that I should not place myself first, but my neighbor. That's what the Bridger family taught me. And that's where it all began. And it hasn't stopped.
Well, thank you, Barry. There was a question that came up before this event. By the way, I noticed in the chat that some of you didn't hear what Barry said about juggling, how he confused the interrogator. It was, I used to juggle 10 and now I juggle 5. And that confused the individual. But Barry was, he probably got tortured more than most people at the Hanoi Hilton, if you can tell from the way he reacted to a lot of things. The one thing, before you answer that question, though, Barry, there's a very important question that we asked you while we were writing the book. And that was, tell us about your worst day at the Hanoi Hilton. Share with us what you told us at that time.
Well, my very quick reaction to that statement was I didn't have any bad days. I was busy. We all were busy. We were fighting like hell to protect those in greater need than ourselves. And that all comes from a value system. Our caring for one another was for us the right thing, the proper thing, the Christian thing to do. We did so naturally, instinctively, without forethought. I was absolutely amazed at the caliber of the people that surrounded me, that helped me, and whom I helped. Unbelievable.
And one thing that you told me at that time was, when you have control of your mind, you will never have a bad day. And therefore, you never did. So let's move to that question that I shared with you. Go ahead and share the question and what your response is.
let me clarify something. John McCain was the most seriously injured POW to arrive in Hanoi. He had 2 broken arms, a broken leg, a broken shoulder, and a band-aided foot and a bad attitude. Anybody would, you know. And it took them a while to realize who they had captured when they captured John McCain, because his dad was a very important admiral in that theater of operations at that time. And so when they found out who they had, the cat, who was the chief interrogator, invited McCain into a interrogation. Because when McCain was shot down, he weighed about 165 pounds, and within about 30 days, he was down to about 100 pounds. It looked like he was going to die. And so they invited him to a meeting, and the cat said, "Would you like to go home?" And the cat said, "We know that we do not have the medical care to help you here, but if you would like to go home, we would like to know." McCain said, "I will tell you tomorrow." The next day, they took McCain into the interrogation. They said, "What is your answer?" He said, "I will not go home except in order of shoot down. I will not go ahead of those who've been here longer than me." And the cat said, "Is that your final answer?" And McCain responded, "Yes." The cat then said to McCain, "Well, things will go very badly for you now." They took him out of the interrogation room to the torture chamber where he broke his arm. So McCain is a patriot in every sense of the word and went through absolute hell like the rest of us in terms of torture. Now, I realize that I know what he said. He basically said that I don't like people who can't escape or who get caught, so forth. I thought about this a bit, and here's my reaction. I would suggest to you that John McCain is the oh heck, what's the kid's name? I can't think of his name. Who? The great basketball coach for Indiana.
Bobby Knight.
Bobby Knight. Hey, I'm glad I've married you, you know that. I'm getting worse. I can't remember squat. Sheila says,
Yeah.
use the fork. Anyway, I think I think the president, Trump, is the Bobby Knight of politics. Now, the reason I say that is you may recall that Bobby Knight was not all that easy to get along with. He basically attacked some of his players in some of the games for not doing well. He ran the referees out of the gymnasium and threw chairs across the gym floor at opponents. But he was a winner. And so I think you can make the case also that although Trump has those mannerisms, he's a winner.
Yeah, well, and the question was, what did Barry, how do you feel about what President Trump said about John McCain? And Barry has great respect for John McCain because they, for a long period of time, they were next to each other in cells. And you challenged each other from time to time. But we've run out of time. We hope that you will all have an opportunity to purchase our book when it comes out, The Spirit to Soar. You'll hear some incredible stories. Barry and Sheila, thank you so much for being our friends. Thank you so much for what you've endured. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. Catherine, it's all yours.
I want to leave everyone with a quote that Barry, I believe it is from you. It says, "The American Vietnam prisoner of war experience is not a story about the plight of American POWs serving in the prison camps of Southeast Asia, nearly so much as it is a revelation of the power of traditional American values. And I'm really grateful for your time. I'm grateful to Jim for being a wonderful moderator. Barry, once again, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to everyone tonight. And we'll see you next time.